If you just study Eastern philosophy, you don't really have like a personal experience. Like it's more about the universal experience. Yeah. And then if you just study psychology, you're only working on the personal level. And with Jung and Eastern philosophy, you're really working on the personal and the universal at the same time, which is really brilliant. Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt-Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado. And we are excited to continue our series on Carl Jung and his contribution to psychology and to the world. And today we're talking about his integration of Eastern philosophy into the Western world. But before we begin, I do want to tell you to and remind you to subscribe to our channel. If you are watching us on YouTube, click here in the button in the corner and make sure you subscribe. And I'd like to dedicate this episode to our coaches, our Jungian coaches that go through our Jungian coach training. It's a year-long training that is so profound to help you go deeper into these concepts, especially the concepts that we're going to share today. And just to let you know, if you are interested in finding out more about our coach training, we do have another cohort always coming up. So please sign up on our website. Check it out in the show notes to find out more.
Yeah, and a special shout out to our students in London and in Europe in general, who we got to meet up with recently.
Yeah, that was so much fun.
That was incredible. Thank you, guys.
Yes, all of those of you who were there in London, we had an amazing event there. And we're having another graduate event in DC coming up too. So let's get into today, Jung and Eastern philosophy. I think this is why I feel so drawn to Jung as well, not just because of the deep work that he did with shadow and dreams, but I always followed Eastern philosophy as well, and it just felt like it fit really well.
Yeah, he was the first to really integrate Eastern wisdom into a Western psychological model. And a lot of people forget that. His contribution, if he only did that, that would be enough to cement him as one of the great founders of psychology. But of course, now what's happening is a lot of the new discoveries in neuroscience and physics is kind of waking people up to the fact that, he was on the right track, essentially. He was thinking
ahead of his time, even.
Very much so, thinking of consciousness as it truly is, this fundamental principle of the universe, not just an emergent property.
And how did he come about exploring yoga philosophy or Eastern philosophy? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. He was in touch with a lot of the great thinkers of his time, mathematicians, anthropologists, archaeologists who were making new discoveries. And one of them was Heinrich Zimmer. And Zimmer's books, man, if you read them, he was really into Eastern philosophy, studying yoga, studying the Upanishads, the Gitas, and thinking about how do we interpret all this material and content. And he was a good friend of Jung's. And in that communication, those conversations they were having, he got interested in the topic.
And he wrote a book called The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is about that East-West connection. So let's get into it.
I think he did the commentary on it.
One of his students wrote it, and then he wrote his version. And there was a little conflict between the two. Like there was a little well, I don't exactly agree with this or that. And that's the great thing about psychology. It's a science. It's not, this is the absolute truth. This is a theory. Let's test it out. Let's play it out. And so we should always think about psychology as that, as a science, as an exploration. But when it comes to Eastern philosophy, there are some universal truths that if there's no truth, then where do you start? So I think the Eastern philosophy gives us a foundation. And then the psychology is more of an interpretation of that foundation.
Absolutely.
If you're going from that paradigm of the Eastern model versus the Western model.
Yeah, so definitely yoga was a big influence in Jung's development of his own psychology, but also that integration piece, right? That he wanted to understand like the bigger picture, because if you look at East-West, there seems to be this tension of these different aspects of seeing the world. Mm-hmm. One, the West is very kind of looking at systems and breaking things down into pieces.
Like a deduction?
Yes,
Reductionist.
a reductionist perspective, exactly, from the scientific perspective. And the East was very much is still very much into the holistic perspective of seeing the oneness. So he says, and this was one of his big approaches to the psyche, the tension between opposites.
Well, isn't it also we all experience that tension with our individual life and our spiritual life as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
The kind of like the universal self versus the individual self.
Yes. So yoga, by definition, is the yoking of the individual's consciousness with the universal consciousness. So right off the bat, he saw that these people are talking about something very fundamental here.
Like the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious.
Yes. And you also see this in yoga, this idea of purification, of purification from the samskaras, meaning you inherit these unconscious patterns of behavior and thought and emotions just from your biology. And we know that
the craving and all that.
The craving, the attitudes towards yourself in life, the impetus to seek out another, for example, the anima and the animus, the attraction to the opposite. All these patterns, there's nothing wrong with them, Jung said, but when you are, let's say, governed by them, just like in yoga, they didn't see anything broken about this. It was simply that you want to liberate yourself so that you can make real choices outside of those patterns.
Yeah, it's like the first part of life, we are building up those patterns. We can't escape that. And in a way, that's what's supposed to happen. And no matter even a terrible event or even a regular event, like a normal everyday human event, they all create patterns in our life. But it doesn't mean that's at midlife, he said, we need to now step away from it. But he never said the pattern was wrong. He never said the pattern was like a wound or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. These are natural processes. And we know there's pretty good scientific data now that shows that, yeah, we're born with a lot of instinctual patterns that are governed through genetics and epigenetics. And that kind of corresponds to what the East called samskaras, that we're already born with a predetermined set of behaviors and attitudes like that are karma, going to express themselves.
Like that dictates our karma in a way.
Yeah, exactly. We could call it karma or we can call it epigenetics, but it's the inherited patterns that are already there. And again, these are natural. In other words, it doesn't mean we're broken or that we're doing anything wrong. It simply means it begs the question, is there something beyond that?
Yeah.
If we're able to transcend those patterns, can we act in a more enlightened and free way?
Well, I think both East and West, Jung's philosophy, ask the question, like, what is the nature of the mind? And if we understand that there's samskaras, the mind has a conditioning element to it, that it's like part of the mind. It's the nature of the mind. There's nothing broken about the mind. It doesn't mean that you have a wound. It means that your mind came up with a survival strategy to, conform to that situation. And that's part of a healthy mind. And I remember when you told me that once, it just blew me away. Like, oh, that's a healthy mind. It's such a paradigm shift, because now you're getting out of the Western medical model and you're getting into the empowerment model.
Yeah. So Jung, when he read about this and started to understand these concepts, you can see that he was integrating both Eastern and Western philosophical models in developing his own idea of what the unconscious is. Where are those patterns stored in the psyche? Well, they're stored in the unconscious mind, meaning we don't necessarily see them in our conscious awareness, but they exert a strong influence on our behavior and our thought patterns.
And I wouldn't say even stored as much as occurs unconsciously. Like it's like in us. I guess stored would be a word, but it's not like we're consciously repressing them. It's like things that we're not aware of that are influencing our life.
Yeah.
It's not that they're unconscious. We're just not conscious of the unconscious. So a lot of people
Yeah.
think it's like dormant things, but it's not dormant, it's alive. It's just we're not conscious of these drivers in our life, these samskaras.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because they're there,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't see them because we just assume them to be destiny, like he says. They're part of what we experience in our everyday life. So these mental imprints, these samskaras, we can think of them in Jung's psychology as these conditioned patterns from past experiences, right? And at the individual level, of course, we're talking about early childhood experiences, just as in the Freudian sense that your childhood and your relationship with your parents and your the adults around you is going to have a strong influence as to the way you see yourself and the way you see the world as you grow up. Unless, of course, you do something about it. In other words, you become
You're stuck in
aware.
that pattern. Right?
Yeah.
You kind of become the expectations of others versus
Yes.
having a free choice of who you really are.
Yeah, and in yoga, of course, it's a mind-body system designed to liberate you from those past conditioned patterns to where you're able to really see things as they truly are instead of through that lens of conditioned mind that kind of gives you a preset way of seeing things.
Well, I know when I first started doing personal growth, and it was even as a hypnotherapist, there's a lot of talk about reprogramming, and that's not what this is. I mean, we have the conditioning. You don't want to recondition your ego to just be a little better. In Jung's work, he wanted you to transcend the ego altogether. So we're not fixing the conditioning, we're transcending it. And it's just a different model than most of like cognitive behavioral is a little more like, let's think more positive and let's change our behavior and kind of like build up that ego. And there's nothing wrong with that. That it's very effective. But when you think about a spiritual path, it's not going to get you to transcend your human experience and actually have access to the wholeness of all of who you are.
Yeah, and the other aspect of the unconscious, of course, is dreams. And there's a strong and powerful tradition of dream work in Eastern philosophy, including yoga and all the different schools that emerged out of the Upanishads. Dream yoga, very little is known still about what they were up to in practicing dream yoga. We know more from the Tibetan schools where it was kept as a written tradition, which they learned from India. But dream yoga, definitely the ancient seers were very well aware of the dream state and its potential for seeing and liberating ourselves from the unconscious patterns of samskaras. So dream work is something we're still rediscovering in the West, but an important aspect of the study of the mind.
I know dreams are so fascinating, and we often think that it's so, oh, that's just a worry I have or had that dream of because I'm anxious about something, but it has such a profound messages if you know how to read them. In yoga, they do talk about the dream life in the East.
Oh, absolutely. It's an integral part of most of the philosophies that emerge from the Upanishads, where you see the three states. The waking state is considered like, okay, this is a place where we're going to work, right? We're going to do our asanas and our breath work, pranayama, and
taking action,
karma yoga, all these important spiritual works that are going to lead to liberation. And then you have the dream state, which was considered part of the subtle mind, where you're moving around in a subtle body.
Kind of a virtual reality?
Pretty much so,
yeah.
and interacting with elements of your own psyche, essentially.
It is kind of like a video game at night we go to, and we're interacting with ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the deep sleep is that restorative state where we go back and sip the nectar of immortality, as you say.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's the third state of mind where there are no thoughts or images or dreams. We experience this kind of emptiness or void, but it's restorative because it's the closest state that our individual minds come to touching that pure awareness that's the base of our being.
And you know what I find it's so interesting with the unconscious, with Jung's work and Eastern philosophy, because it gives you a bigger understanding of the mind. Like in Western psychology, the mind is your thoughts, your feelings, your action, you know, like what you're thinking and feeling, really contained in the body, and not really delving into the spiritual aspects and the consciousness. And I'm sure there's many therapists who would bring in the East-West, but I'm talking about just the traditional Western psychology. And if you explore the unconscious the way Jung wanted you to explore it, you have to understand Eastern philosophy, because you have to understand what you're really working with.
Yeah, absolutely. Because beyond these three states, beyond the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state, there was a fourth state, or it's called the fourth, but it was really not a separate state of mind, but the one that created the three states of mind, or that supported the three states of minds, which is pure awareness, this pure consciousness that is the foundation of what we call the human mind. And this was a very deep kind of revelation to Jung, that these people had a very kind of more accurate understanding of consciousness beyond the Western scientific perspective. Now, in the West, what happened was the founding fathers of the scientific method were really interested in developing the scientific method in order to observe matter, not the mind.
They even observe behavior, like Skinner was like, is the mouse going to get the cheese or not?
Yes, but people like Newton and Galileo, they developed the scientific method more to observe the physics of cause and effect in physical matter. Newton himself primarily wrote as an alchemist. He was more interested in the metaphysical, alchemical processes.
But everyone kind of pushes that away.
Yeah, they don't mention that too much. The reason science is not well geared to look at the mind, again, is because the mind is non-material. We can't see it. We can't observe it. All we can observe, like Skinner said, was behavior, like the physical actions that people take. And so it got caught up in that psychology wanted to be a valid science, just like physics. But in using that tool of science, it limited itself in understanding of consciousness.
Which is why Jung was so controversial, because he kept bringing in the spiritual aspect of a person.
Yeah.
When we went to his house, he said, God will be present whether or not, I don't know the exact quote, but God will be present whether evoked or not. Like, he was a very spiritual man. But he did it by going inward, by going through his own process of exploring the unconscious. And I think that's the difference from my first exploration into personal development. I just thought the unconscious was like a computer. You just reprogrammed it, think positive, and then you get positive results. You attract the things you want. And learning about Jung and the way he approaches the unconscious, that this unconscious is alive and it's like working with us. It's a way to really understand what you're really working with. And also too, the spiritual part, having that Eastern philosophy, it's like a foundation of understanding like the basic higher knowledge. Yeah. And when I was first delving into my stuff, it was like the spiritual stuff was like all over the place. Like there was no rhyme or reason. And, there was all these kind of theories, but it wasn't based on anything. And so this kind of gave me a ground when I first started. And I really believe that this is a really wonderful foundation in what he created.
So one of the big influences that Jung derived from the yoga and the Eastern philosophy, of course, was this idea of the mandala as an archetype of the self. And in his writings, of course, the mandala is all over the place. He sees that as here's proof of this archetypal theory that he developed, that human beings are always looking for symbols of the higher self. And he thought, and he wrote this, that the mandala he considered the perfect symbol to represent this higher self, because it's a symbol of union. It shows the geometry of the universe, in a sense, the creation. in this beautiful way that it has a self harmonizing element in it.
You know what I love about the mandala, Jung's theory on it is that he said that the path of personal growth is like the self is in the center, but he said it's circumambulation. You're kind of circling around the self and trying to go deeper within it, versus it's a stair step or a path that you go to one stage and then you go to like a linear path. It's more of a circumambulation of the self. And when you look at a mandala, you see that the self is in the center, and you're kind of like working on all these angles to get closer and closer. But it's also too not there is no finish line, because as we live in the world, we're creating duality all the time. So we're always having to deal with this, like discovering ourselves again.
Absolutely.
Makes it exciting.
Yeah. And so in a lot of the yogic traditions, the mandala was used as a concentration aid. The yogi would look at the mandala and try to internalize it, memorize it in a sense, or take a mental picture of it, and then recreate it within the psyche to where, if you look at it for a while and then close your eyes, can you see it perfectly as the way you saw it? And it's an incredible exercise to do. If you have never done it, do it. It's a great way to train the mind to focus and to concentrate. What was the ultimate aim of yoga? This union or yoking of the individual psyche to the universal psyche. It was self-realization, of course, realizing the true nature of yourself.
That you're not the ego.
That you are not the ego. In Jungian terms, that you're not the persona. You're not the ego.
You're not the body.
You are this infinite consciousness that is the ground of your being. And that is the ultimate aim of yoga. And so we see it in Jung's work, in Jung's psychology, as the process of individuation. For him, it was about developing a Western yoga, right? That was able to take modern people through the same process that a yogi would go through, but through a psychological process of individuation, of understanding, first of all, that you're not the ego. And he did that through shadow work. The shadow, the integration of the shadow essentially shows you in a very practical way that what you're experiencing in the social realm, the interaction with others and the being triggered or confronting and setting up boundaries with others, is essentially an internal process. It's all you essentially that you're experiencing, but it appears as if you're experiencing an external reality that is independent of your psyche.
The mirror that we see of ourselves and others. But at first we don't want to admit that person reflecting me, especially people that really trigger us or irritate us. And when we invite it in, it's just a really amazing, it's a freedom that you can't even describe, because your whole life is to build up this persona. And in Eastern philosophy, the same thing. It's not about building up the ego. It's about letting it go. It's about transcending the ego. So they work really, really well together. And I'm glad there was someone in psychology that was open to that, because I feel like if you just do Eastern philosophy, if you just study Eastern philosophy, you don't really have like a personal experience. Like it's more about the universal experience. Yeah. And then if you just study psychology or work on the psychology level, you're only working on the personal level. And with Jung and Eastern philosophy, you're really working on the personal and the universal at the same time, which is really brilliant.
Yeah,
it's like you need both. It's almost like the yin and the yang, or the conscious, unconscious. You need both to have the transformation.
Yeah, that's a good point. The evolution, kind of at the macro level, right? At the world level, you see these two very divergent points of view coming together and creating not only tension but also a harmony, right? That it is a yin and yang, that the East and the West can complement each other. One by giving us a sense of the material world and how to live and harmonize with it. And the other one, the Eastern philosophy, is a way of understanding the inner experience of the mind.
We don't want to escape the world. We will want to just go to our spiritual life. Like, let's get done with this life and move on to some better place. We want to be able to have a spiritual life in our physical bodies, and that's what the integration is about. It's not about pushing away, and it's also not about judging the ego or making the ego wrong for its conditioning. It's understanding the nature of the ego. That's it. It's not, I'll be better when I stop being negative, or I'll be better when I stop being jealous, or I'll be better when I'm more confident. I'll be better when, I stop getting triggered by this thing. It's like, okay, it's information. And you're like more compassionate towards yourself and your humanity. And you don't feel this like need to fix it, but more to become aware. And the more aware you are, the more compassionate you are. And then at the same time, you get compassionate to other people. Everyone else is going through tough times. They're all dealing with their own conditioning. And if we understand that, we say, that's not really that person. That's their conditioning that's responding to me. How can we have a little compassion for that person? Even if they come across in terrible, ways, we can start to have, open up that door of light for them. And then also we'll look at ourselves as why that person triggers us in the first place. But it's just a more integrated way to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then ultimately you see that whenever you look at the mind, you're going to see the same thing. So when the yogis looked at the mind, they saw that there were these kleshas, these natural obstacles to the integration or the yoking of the individual psyche to the collective psyche. And Jung, of course, saw that, there's resistance. There's going to be resistance from the ego, but rightly so, because the ego is designed to protect us from chaos, from the unconscious, from losing our sense of self.
Even a sense of control. The ego does. The unconscious is like walking into a cave, and you don't know in that dark cave that you've never been before if you're going to find a treasure or a beast. And so your ego's like, I don't know. But what happens is you do see the beast, but you also see the treasure. It's the treasure hard to find, as Campbell would say. So we have to kind of be willing to go to the places that scare us. We have to explore the unconscious, but have a map and understanding. We're not just going willy-nilly into, without any plan or without any understanding of what we're really doing here. And when you do that with a guide, it's just a transformational journey, because when you face the beast and you transcend it and get the treasure, you're not afraid anymore. You have a resilience in life that nothing can stop you. It's just amazing.
And of course, the king or queen of the kleshas is ignorance. Ignorance, meaning not that we are lacking in intelligence, meaning simply that we don't know the information. We don't have access to this knowledge. That is what holds people back. The true understanding, the higher knowledge of what is the psyche, what is consciousness. If you don't understand that, then you're working on the wrong problem. You're always, like in the Western tradition, we're always looking for consciousness in the neurons and the brain. And of course, it makes sense to us that that's where it is, in the brain. But consciousness from the Eastern perspective is not in the brain. It is the foundational kind of reality that gives rise to all existing forms, all existing patterns. Therefore, if we look for it in an object, we'll never find it. Essentially, we will never find it because its nature is non-material. So ultimately, then we see Jung's work as a parallel system, a psychological system, parallel to what the yogis were aiming for, which is self-realization, but in a Western psychological model.
Yeah, and I think it's no accident that yoga has taken over our Western culture. There's yoga studios on every corner, but people are doing it for working out mostly, or stress relief. But that means that they're around that idea and the kind of the concepts. And I think it's a beautiful integration right now. And so if you're into yoga and the yoga and asanas, it's now go deeper into the philosophy. Read the Gita, read the Upanishads, learn about these deeper concepts and how they affect your life. They seem very universal. I remember when I first read them, they were very universal. But if you understand it in the Jung's work with individuation, it all fits together. It's like the piece that's missing from someone to get the bridge to what this really means. And also, too, I think that you can know something intellectually, but going through the process of individuation gives you a direct experience of these concepts where it's not like thinking about it or understanding it or believing it. It's really having a knowing. Like they asked Jung, do you believe in God? And when one of his last interviews, and he said, I don't believe, I know. And it's like you want to get to that from that knowing or understanding to really, believing, that maybe there's something out there, maybe this makes sense, but to having like that direct knowing that is unshakable, that is really, it's priceless to have that.
If you are new to yoga, look into it, right? And we'll post some of the research that shows its great benefits, not only physically, but mentally and beyond that, of course, spiritually. If you are practicing yoga in the Western style of asana yoga, think about going deeper. Look at its philosophical foundations and explore the spiritual dimensions of it. And of course, if you're more advanced, think about this higher integration into with science, so that we can start to think of a more universal way of looking at consciousness and its potential for directing our own human evolution.
Well, this was a very juicy episode. One of my favorite topics is bringing it all together. We are so glad you joined us today. Before we go, we do want to remind you to subscribe to our channel. We want to see you every week. Always feel free to post comments. We're eager to hear what you think about the show, what other topics you'd like to have us host and talk about. We would love to hear that as well. So have a wonderful day, and thank you for tuning in to Soul Sessions.